Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the program. Today we have a great show. Zed Jelani is joining us to discuss the coalition government in Israel that could remove Benjamin Netanyahu from power. And we're talking about single-payer health care with New York State Senator Jabari Brisport.
But one of the big stories today, Senator Joe Manchin seems poised to blow up the For the People Act. At least that's what he claims. Over the weekend, the West Virginia senator published an op-ed detailing why he's voting against the legislation. And Emily, what's so remarkable about this is that he went through this exact same cycle about 2 months ago.
Right.
He has the media trained like circus seals. Like all he has to do is come out and the inflection in his voice triggers an entire cycle.
Right.
Of which way is the Manchin wind blowing at this. So this op-ed that he published over the weekend comes just a couple days after an interview he did on CNN on Thursday. Let's play that here to show the difference between that op-ed and his interview Thursday.
Everything was done in the most bipartisan way. And for him...
They blocked it because of the filibuster.
Well, one person blocked it on that, but the bottom line is we have 7 people, 6 that voted, 7 would. We need 3 more. Let's give it another shot.
I mean, so you can say you'll never reduce the 60-vote threshold.
Basically, we're going to make the place work. We're going to make the place.
You're not taking that off the table then.
We're making it work. We're going to make the place work.
You're not reducing the 60-vote threshold off the table.
We're going to make the place work. I don't know what else I can tell you. And you can't make it work unless the minority has input. You can't disregard a person that's not in the majority. The Senate was never designed that way.
So he's being pushed hard there by Manu Raju, and in the op-ed, he actually accuses Democrats of saying they've attempted to demonize the filibuster and conveniently ignore how it has been critical to protecting the rights of Democrats in the past. So you go straight from that clip on Thursday of him playing coy with Manu Raju and saying, really, when Manu says, so what are you going to do with the filibuster? And he's saying, no, I'm not taking it off the table, not eliminating it. You heard that just come out of his mouth. No. And then an op-ed over the weekend actually criticizes Democrats for proposing the elimination of the filibuster.
Seems interesting, right? Except this entire thing happened 2 months ago.
Yes.
So he went on cable news. He sent panic through Washington talking about the filibuster. And then a couple days later, he came out with an op-ed. Sounds like this past weekend? No, it was 2 months ago. Let's play his interview here with Chris Wallace.
I'd make it harder to get rid of the filibuster. I'm supporting the filibuster. I'm going to continue to support the filibuster. I think it defines who we are as a Senate. I'll make it harder to get rid of it, but it should be painful if you want to use it. You should make sure the place works to where, okay, I want to work with you. How can we do this? How do we move forward? My Republican friends are my friends. They're not my enemies. And my Democrats is my colleagues. They're not my enemy either. That's my caucus. Together, we've got to make this place work, and it should be harder to invoke pain. It should be painful for us. Don't make it painful for the other side.
All right. So what he's saying there is, look, the 60-vote threshold, without forcing senators to come to the floor to actually debate and actually filibuster the way that he mentioned in a different part of the interview, Mr. Smith goes to Washington. He's like, we need to bring back the talking filibuster. And so that panicked everyone in Washington, or panicked the Republicans, saying, wait, okay, he is serious about filibuster reform. When he says there needs to be pain for the minority, it means he wants them to have to come to the floor. Right. And when you have to come to the floor to defend your position, there has to be a way for the majority, a 51-vote majority, to end the debate at some point. Because if there isn't, there's no reason to come to the floor.
Right. So he wants to weaken the filibuster without eliminating the filibuster, might be one way to say it. But it is sort of amazing to take this tour through Manchin's recent comments on the filibuster. And there's a huge difference between recent in terms of this last week and recent in terms of the last several months. And it's stark because the broader context here, the filibuster, when you have this slim level of a majority in Congress, it's all that's stopping Democrats who hold the House, the presidency, and the Senate right now from passing their agenda, sort of their full-throated agenda. That's what's keeping them from that. And Joe Manchin, when you have a slim majority, is almost like a one-man filibuster, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so he showed a little leg to Chris Wallace there back in end of March, and then immediately he comes out in the Washington Post, you put that up here, and says, I will not weaken or eliminate the filibuster, which leaves open the possibility for reforming it. And so this is early April, 2 months ago. And Democrats say, well, I guess we've lost Joe Manchin. I guess this is over. But actual Democrats on Capitol Hill are like, no, this is part of the dance. And the way we know it's part of the dance is that 2 months later he's telling CNN that he's open to it, and then just days after that he's saying, well, he's not. So let's talk about why somebody would do this.
Right.
Like, these sound like the rantings of a crazy person. Like, 'cause these are two different positions that he's claiming, and he's now done this at least twice. But there is a political logic to it. And I'll tell you what I think he's doing, and I'm curious for your take on this. If Manchin says, the last thing I ever want to do is end the filibuster, but if Republicans don't go along with me, then I'm willing to do it. And Democrats have said, well, he could have written that in the West Virginia Gazette. He could have written that in the Washington Post 2 months ago. But if that's what he writes, the headline is Manchin open to ending filibuster. He doesn't want that headline.
Right.
The headline he wants back in West Virginia for that audience is Manchin defending filibuster and standing up for bipartisanship. He has to make it clear to people back home. He believes that he's doing everything he can before he gets rid of the filibuster. So if he's just open to it for 6 months and then does it, that wasn't very interesting.
Yeah.
The drama comes from him really not wanting to do it and being dragged by Republican obstruction into it. What's your read on this cycle that he keeps repeating?
Well, I think that's a smart read. And I also would add to that, should be politically terrified of getting the entire Democratic agenda pinned to him. And so that's really important to him right now as well, that if he does become that domino, then he's a domino for a whole line of Democratic agenda points that in what is now and has quickly become a deep red state like West Virginia would be politically very dangerous for him. He's, survived a lot. He's weathered a lot of political storms in West Virginia. He's popular there. He is entrenched there. But the Democratic agenda could hurt him if they're able to pin it to him because of filibuster reform, because of the filibuster reform, filibuster weakening, or filibuster elimination. And so he's being really, really careful until he's able to see, I think, what is coming through the pipeline plausibly with the congressional calendar and all of that. Right.
Democrat is definitely a toxic brand in West Virginia. And even in a hugely Democratic year, he won re-election in 2018 by, I believe, 3 points. So he's up again in 2024. He loves to go on Fox to make his argument. He was on Fox this weekend with Chris Wallace talking about his position on the filibuster. Let's roll that one.
I think it's a wrong piece of legislation to bring our country together and unite our country, and I'm not supporting that because I think it would divide us further. I don't want to be in a country that's divided any further than I'm in right now. I love my country, and I think my Democrat and Republican colleagues feel the same. If we continue to divide it and separate us more, it's not going to be united, and it's not going to be the country that we love and know, and it's going to be hard because it'll be back and forth no matter who's in power.
Let's talk about the actual legislation that he's saying he's not going to eliminate the filibuster for in order to pass this For the People Act, because I want to get your take on this partisan voting rights bill that Democrats are pushing through. His argument is internally incoherent all the way through. Like he says we can't do partisan voting rights reform. That would destroy our country. Well, that's completely ahistorical because coming out of the Civil War, we did partisan voting rights reform. It was called the Constitutional Amendment that gave the franchise to freed slaves. So there was not a single Democrat that voted for that. Nobody would say that was wrong, that we should have waited until the ex-Confederates were willing to come around to some type of compromise for that. No, voting rights, that's the right thing to do. It doesn't matter who votes for it. But it's also internally incoherent because Republicans are pushing partisan voting rights bills all over the country. And Manchin is saying the only partisan thing you can't do is have Congress push back against that.
Well, it's also incoherent because if you are, a defender of the constitutional process, then when you have the votes, you can do what you want to do. And so it's not necessarily aconstitutional to push through partisan comprehensive legislation. It may be unwise, and he might want to argue that in a partisan sense, it's not the best bill, it's a sloppy bill. And he sort of gets into that argument. He says this is not the right bill to test out this big partisan push. But tell tell us then, sir, why this bill in particular isn't. And let's actually get this tweet from Edward Isaac Dover up on the screen, because it's very telling. Manchin is the one who wrote the op-ed, but he's not the only Democrat skeptical of all of what's in the For the People Act. And so he's basically, what he's getting at here, I think, is very true. There are a bunch of Democrats more than happy to have him, Manchin, take the heat for them. I think that's exactly what's happening here, is that Manchin is in a situation where politically he really has to oppose this piece of legislation. And that's, I think, also why he's not getting into the sort of substantive opposition to the legislation, because this is, a partisan decision no matter what, or partisan. This is a politically expedient decision no matter what. He needs to do this for his political survival. But he's going to have to take the flack anyway. He's going to have to take the heat anyway. So all those other Democrats that think this bill is a sloppy one, which it is. I mean, this is not the best tightly written bill. Even if you want a partisan Democrat piece of voting legislation, this is not the one that you want. This is like the kind of legislation that makes a political point. It's kind of symbolic. And so to push through a vote on that, I mean, I get why there's all these other Democrats in the back letting Manchin take the arrows, and because he has to do that anyway. And he always is the face of the sort of like bipartisan negotiations in the Senate.
Yeah, it's politically beneficial for him to be the lightning rod, because it helps him back in West Virginia look like he's not, going along with Democrats. I think the thing that he's really fighting against on behalf of these other nameless Democrats is the matching funds. So the For the People Act includes a 6-to-1 match for small dollar contributions, so it does not get rid of big money. Citizens United allows big money, and you'd have to take over the Supreme Court to undo that. But what it says is if you get $250 in a small contribution under $250, that's multiplied 6 times by federal money. That fundamentally kind of transforms elections in the United States in a way that incumbents don't want to have to deal with. It's remarkable that it not only got through the House, but is 1 vote short of having 50 in the Senate. It's wild that it's gotten that far. It has 49 co-sponsors. So a potential path forward could be that you take Title I of the For the People Act, which is about election reforms, automatic voter registration. You take the part that bans gerrymandering around the country, and you apply that to what he says he'd vote for, which is the John Lewis Act, which is H.R. 4. Now, that doesn't have 10 Republicans. That has 1. Mm-hmm. It has Lisa Murkowski, the sort of Republican, who has ranked choice voting in Alaska, so she's free to she can do whatever she wants. She won as a write-in. Yes. After they beat her the Republicans beat her in a primary, she won with the name Murkowski. Yes. In a write-in. So
Alaska politics.
They're not taking her out from the right in Alaska. So okay, now you have 51 for that. You get 9 more Republicans and add elements of the For the People Act. Okay, fine. Now maybe we can talk. But of course, there aren't 9 more.
Right.
He keeps talking about these 7 Republicans that voted to impeach Trump. Wonderful. Pretend you could get all 7 on the For the People Act, which you couldn't.
No way.
I'm not a genius, but I think 60 is more than 57.
Yeah.
So you still don't have it. And 60 is way more than 51.
Right.
So what's he talking about here?
Right. And again, remember when you have Edward Isaac Dover saying, there's probably 10 Democratic senators. If there's 49 co-sponsors of that bill and there's 10 Democratic senators who are taking a backseat to Manchin's sort of public taking of the arrows, I don't know if this came to a vote and people actually had to make a decision on it, what the numbers would be like. And so I think they're, again, just like pushing to get this not to have to be something that they vote on, because, as you say, there are parts of this bill that would be utterly transformative. I think the reason that it got through the House, which has a Democratic majority, is because nobody ever expects this bill to pass. But it is remarkable that a bill like that, because the politicization of elections was so intensified after the November election and through January 6th and beyond, where there's still challenges to some of these results in various states, that's how it ended up. Nobody thought that this is something that would actually get so much momentum, and it has. Right. But I don't think it's a thing that a lot of these people who actually voted for would want their name sort of etched in stone when push comes to shove. Might not be up to them, but so the heat is now coming down on Manchin. Jamal Bowman was asked about Manchin's opposition. Let's roll that. He had some pretty harsh words for him.
Manchin is a no on doing anything to end the filibuster. He put it in writing. Your reaction? Joe Manchin has become the new Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell, during Obama's presidency, said he would do everything in his power to stop Obama. He's also repeated that now during the Biden presidency by saying he would do everything in his power to stop President Biden. And now Joe Manchin is doing everything in his power to stop democracy and to stop our work for the people, the work that the people sent us here to do.
Okay, so that's just from this morning. And this is going to continue to unfold all week with huge implications, of course. I mean, this may seem like a niche, insular Washington conversation about some small, constitutional requirement, but it's not. I mean, this is huge. This has implications for the Biden presidency, for the Democratic agenda. It's not a niche, insular thing, even though it is this sort of wonky idea and talk about the filibuster. This has huge implications, and that's why it's necessary to sort of figure out and nail down what's going on. Ryan, I'm really curious, when we take that quote that was just this morning, how do you think, is that something that sets the tone or even reflects the tone for the left's reaction to Manchin's sort of flipping and flopping back and forth over the course of the last couple months? Because he's really going to have to continue to get nailed down on this to a point where, I mean, can he just run out the clock?
Well, he certainly can run out the clock. That's the oldest trick in Washington, so he can try. Yes, I think you're going to see more of that from the kind of progressive wing of the particularly House Democrats, calling him McConnell is the worst insult that you can throw at any Democrat. But so there's a balancing act. Manchin doesn't want to look like he's caving to left-wing pressure, but at the same time, he wants it known that the left doesn't like him. Back in Washington, every time Jamal Bowman or AOC or anybody else who's on the left wing of the Democratic Party says something bad about him, I'm sure he makes a little clip, makes sure that a lot of the voters around West Virginia see that. Look, see, Jamal Bowman thinks I'm just like McConnell. You should reelect me in 2024. And so he's trying. What seems like he's trying to do, get as much anger from the left to show that he's standing up to Democrats, and then show that Republicans are unwilling to do the same.
So take the arrows from both sides,
right?
Not just from Republicans, but also from the left, and that sort of helps with the Republican West Virginia voter.
Right, and he's like, look, I'm taking all these slings and arrows to stand up for my position against the predominant wing of the Democratic Party, these socialists that you're so scared of. But yet my Republican colleagues won't stand up to Mitch McConnell, won't stand up to the Republican establishment. And so because they won't stand up to their establishment and they're lockstep against everything that we want to do, I had no choice but to reform the filibuster and make the Senate work better.
That's really interesting. And let's remember, I mean, West Virginia is a longtime Democratic stronghold that has sort of newly become not just purple, but pretty solidly red. And there's this anti-establishment mentality among voters that I do understand Manchin is playing to, where he's saying, Washington is broken. I'm just trying to make it work.
We'll see. We'll tell you what's on our radars next.